Hello, today I'm going to show you how I've coloured up La La Land Crafts Afternoon Tea Marci in a sparkly dress. First I take a very light marker and make a few lines to see where I might want the folds on the dress. It's nice to have an idea of this before you colour them in with a really dark marker. I take my RV17, once I know where I want the folds, and draw in the shadowed parts. As we're going to make this dress sparkly, it really doesn't need to be all that neat and tidy. You can make however many folds you want really. I've opted for just a few for this. Using my RV55, I'm blending outwards from the shadowed area. I only do a couple at a time so that the ink won't dry in between. That will make it blend better. Going out from the RV55 with my RV52, I'm adding the lightest parts of the dress. I try to do one part of the dress at a time, so I'm deliberately separating the top part of the dress from the skirt part. I'm also drawing in the shadows twice to make sure that they get a slightly deeper colour. It really just depends on how dark you want the dress to be before you add the sparkly part. As you can see, I'm only doing small areas at a time so the ink doesn't have time to dry in between. And if there are parts that I feel haven't blended properly, I just make sure I go over with a lighter marker again. Because I want the middle part to be slightly different from the rest, I'm making sure I finish the other parts around it before I start in the middle. Once again, I'm starting with the RV17, which I then blend out with my RV55, and then I finish with the lighter colour that is RV52. In the middle here, to make sure that it stands out a little bit further, I'm leaving a gap on each side that I will keep white so that it gets an extra highlighted area next to the shadows. I'm just going over slightly to make sure that I get the contrasts how I want them in the folds. I'm using RV17 to draw in the darker areas on the top part of her dress, making sure she gets a little bit of ruffles and folds there as well. I then blend it out with my RV55 and leaving some areas that I want to remain highlighted. I then go over the majority of the areas again with my RV52 and try to make sure it blends nicely. It doesn't really have to blend perfectly as it's going to be sparkly, and the lines will not be as obvious as if it had been a plain dress. I do want the shadows a little bit deeper though, so I'm just going over it again. As the paper holds a lot of ink, you can add the layers more than once if you feel that you don't have enough contrast, for example. When I do sparkly dresses, I like to have a lot of nuances in the actual sparkles. So first I go over the RV17 area with my R39 and creating loads of little dots, trying to make them seemingly random, and it doesn't really matter if they go into the lighter area on either side. And as this doesn't need to blend or anything like that, it doesn't matter if the area is dry, so you can do the whole image in one go and not having to swap markers back and forth. The area that I'm doing now is the area I previously used the RV55 on. This time I'm creating the dots with my RV17. I'm always making sure that I make the dots in the marker that is one shade deeper than the one I coloured with. Once I'm done using RV17 to mark with, I'm now going over the RV52 area with my RV55. As you can see, because you are gradually using a lighter marker, you are still keeping most of the contrast you made when you were colouring in the folds to start with. I do try to avoid doing the same pattern for too long. I prefer the dots being somewhat random. It takes a little bit of time to create sparkles this way, but the more colour you have in it, the more markers you use. Obviously, the more interesting the pattern, the sparkles will be once it's done. my Sakura Gelly Roll. I love this one. It makes tiny little dots, and of course it takes a while to make them, but they look really cool once the dress is done. Don't worry if you think they're a bit too small, because we're going to go over the image again with a white marker that makes slightly larger dots as well. I'm going to go over the entire dress with this pen, both on the very deep areas and on the very light areas. As you might see, it's already making the dress look rather sparkly. The great bit here as well is that you don't need to do it all at once. So if you get a bit bored making all of these dots, you can just go away, have a snack, come back. It's also quite easy to just watch a bit of telly or something while you're doing it, because it doesn't really have to be perfect. I don't think it's possible to make it perfect, and it would possibly even look weird if it was perfect. If you ever have a problem with, say, a sticky marker, or that you get a splotch that the marker is dripping on your image, especially if you're colouring a dress, it's very easy to recover everything by just making the dress sparkly, because it's not that obvious underneath all the dots what has happened. And I've personally saved a couple of images that way, because it's so annoying when you're nearly done with the image and something happens and you just want to bin it, but it's much cooler to just make the dress sparkly. And this is my white Sharpie marker. I'm going to write the names of the white markers I use in the description below. Once again, I'm going over the entire image to make the dots. Beware that this one takes a little bit longer to dry as well. And you can see it quite clearly already that there are now loads of different colours in the sparkles on the dress. Tiny white dots, a little bit bigger white dots, and the dots of the various shades of pink that I've used. Now we're going to do the shoes. Once again, I start making the areas where I want the darkest marker, where I want the shadows, with my RV17. It can be a little bit fiddly when it is a no lines image, but most of the time it is just like colouring up any other image. The lines are just a bit fainter, and you've got to make sure that you manage to put in the contrast so that you can see the different parts and tell them apart. I blended out the RV17 with the RV55 before adding RV52 for the highlights. And then I'm going over the image again, making the dots, adding the R39 dots to the RV17 area, and then the RV17 dots to the RV55 area, before going over the RV52 area with my RV55 marker. And then of course we're going to add a little white dot with the Sakura Gelly Roll. I've opted to not use my Sharpie on that area because the area is so small after all. Now, doing the hairband, I'm first drawing in the shadowed area at the bottom of the hairband with my RV17, also drawing around the flowers slightly so that you get the contrast between the flowers in her hair and what she's wearing. I'm also making sure I draw in a fold so it doesn't end up as a big block of colour. Blending out the shadowed area with my RV55, leaving just a little bit of space for the lighter marker, and then I go over everything with my RV52 to make sure that it blends nicely. And once again we're repeating the process from before with the R39 going over the darker areas, making dots. Over the middle shaded area we're using RV17, and over the highlighted areas we're going to go over it with RV55. Once again I'm going to use both of the white pens to create the glittery effect. First I'm using the Sakura Gelly Roll, making loads of random white dots, and then I'm going over it with my Sharpie, making slightly larger dots again. And we have a sparkly headband. It's time to colour up the flowers. I'm going over the very faint lines with my C5 marker, making sure I primarily go over where I want the shadowed areas. Then I blend them out a tiny bit with my C3 and drawing in the remainders of the lines with this marker as it's a little bit lighter than the previous, before blending it out with my C1. As the flowers are rather small on her shoes, I'm not really going to keep a white area. I will do that on the flowers she's got on her head though. It can be a little bit fiddly doing this with no lines, but you can also get away with making a mistake or two, as you can't really see where the lines are. When doing the flower she's got in her hair, I start with doing a flower at a time. First I used the C5 to create the darker areas around where the faint lines are, before blending them out with the C3, going over it again with the C1, leaving very small areas of white to get an even deeper contrast. I'm going to repeat this process on all 3 flowers she's got in her hair. If you feel that it's difficult to separate the different parts of the flower, you can always go over with the darker marker to create the shadows again. All of these techniques can obviously be used in the normal version as well. It doesn't have to be no lines, obviously. I'm just going over all of the flowers to create a little bit of deeper shadows with my C5. For the leaves, I first create the low light with YG67. I then blend that outwards a little bit using my YG63. And to make sure that the leaves stand out and look nice and fresh, I go over with my YG13. And we're done. I hope you enjoyed this video and that you'll be colouring up loads of sparkly dresses. I'll see you again soon.